Great. So I'm super pleased to be on this panel. Things are super exciting now, and I think we're really sort of touching on a very interesting topic. My name is Stefan Siegel. I'm the founder of Not Just a Label, and I'm pleased to be joined by Katie Erlandson, Director of Business Development. You cannot hear us? You can hear us.
Okay.
I think you're on the wrong channel, girls.
They don't have a headset.
Sorry, Katie. Katie Erlandson, Director of Business Development at the recruiting agency Fourth Floor. To my left, Burak, Cakmak, the Dean of Parsons School of Fashion, and Jonathan Kyle Farmer, the Chair of the MFA Fashion Design School at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. So I remember 3 years ago, we organized a panel in New York at the Waldorf Astoria when Not Just a Label opened its first pop-up store in New York, and it was both of you on the panel, and I think a lot of things have changed since then. The profession of a fashion designer is extremely hyped. I hope you agree with me that there's almost too many fashion designers around. There's enough of them, but also the business model for a designer has massively changed. Designers that we see on Not Just a Label, they don't necessarily create collections anymore as they used to. They can sell however they want to via direct-to-consumer platforms. They monetize their business and their creativity in so many different ways. At the same time, we have, let's say, the old-school fashion industry, which is almost like a Titanic that is sinking. So, Katie, why in the world would a young graduate join the world of big brands and go work for them?
Putting me on the spot. Yes, because I think that they want to be part of the process. They want to be part of the brand. They want to work with great people. They want to be part of a sustainable company that actually is doing something that makes a difference. They want to design. They want a creative outlet. They want to be part of an exciting brand.
And you said, let's say applicants or candidates are much more selective on who they join, so there is a change in that behavior as well.
There is, indeed. I think that, again, it's candidates want the story. They want to know that they're part of something that's making a difference, and I think that they are not going after that kind of larger fast fashion brands. They're looking for smaller brands. They can have more involvement with the product and also make an impact and be part of the process more.
Yeah. Burak, we had a conversation a few days ago.
Actually, even to add to this conversation, the reality is there's more brands than ever in the world. Industry is bigger than ever. So there's definitely a demand for more people to get into it. It's just the roles are changing. So I think the need for recruitment process is always going to be there. Even with the large brands, there's potentially an increase in number of people that they're trying to bring in. But we recognize that there's a lot of people trying to focus on just the fashion design side. And that's probably, it's being challenged in terms of what is the design process, how many designers we need into the future versus how many people should be part of the industry. Yeah. So if we look at it as two separate segments, then we can see that maybe there's oversaturation from a fashion design perspective for the brands that the way we know it. But then the industry itself is growing, and there's a need to think about design process in a different way.
Yeah. Kyle, I think there's obviously a question about the creativity, but also the profession of a fashion designer. You mentioned a lot of sort of new roles that the world actually needs, like body architect or design drape fit analyst. Yeah. Where do they play a role in this?
So I mean, for me, it's more about defining a new role, inventing one, rather than becoming a fashion designer and fitting into a system that, as you just said, is a sinking Titanic ship, which is very optimistically exciting. But I think it's more about, what are you good at? What are you really good at? And the illusion of the title of the grandeur of fashion designer being the ultimate goal. I think if we can shift the thinking around that and give the same value and credibility to pattern cutters and makers, so it doesn't become this ultimate, Project Runway culture of being the name behind it. I think that for me is how I encourage my students to redefine themselves as creatives.
Yeah. But then there's obviously the question on is hype at the moment replacing design? Do we actually need designers? If you look at sort of what is happening right now, it seems like you can be a DJ and a designer rather than someone who actually learned their trade in schools like yours. So where do you guys see that part of the world going?
That's one of my biggest beefs in the world is
go ahead.
you know, the celebrity culture and endorsements, and you know, being a famous person, whatever that you're famous for, singing, whatever, and then just attaching your name to a brand and then becoming, you know, I'm not going to say her name because every time I do one of these things, I always mention the same person. It's Rihanna. But you know, just there was a moment in London Fashion Week where she did something for River Island. It was some years ago,
yeah.
And then suddenly all the young students that had graduated from St. Martin's Royal College, you know, the schools where they'd been laboring over their studies for 6+ years, disappeared. You know, they were ignored by the press because Rihanna stuck her name on River Island's brand. That's just a very small example of many, many, many versions of that. And I do believe that, you know, the education and what we provide in a space that is, you know, academic rigor to become a designer and become and own that title, fashion designer, is something that we need to take back.
Yeah.
As opposed to something that is simply, I am also, I can't suddenly become a singer. Definitely not. But, you know, it doesn't work the other way around. So it's like, you know, just because you got the money, is it okay just to suddenly become the next big fashion designer?
Yeah.
Well, I personally don't have an issue with people trying to enter into fashion from every angle, including even trying to be a designer. It just put more pressure on us to figure out what is the future of design education and how do we shape it so it stands apart from everything else. In some ways aligned with what Kyle is saying, of course, but we recognize that a designer has to be more than anything a critical thinker and really understand the systems that they're part of, and how to bring solutions that is much more based on research and the process rather than just the physical look of a garment or an object that's being sold.
Yeah.
It's easy to create products today. You can automate it fully. Most of the time you can go to a factory and buy as a private label collection. So you don't have to be a designer to create a brand. So in that reality, designer's role evolves into something else. That's why we are pushing those boundaries at schools to say that what can you do, not just to be able to create a garment, but beyond that as well, to look at how to change the fashion system overall, because you understand it deeply, the process of and the culture and the history of fashion, and use those elements to see how do we redefine the way we create products, retail, engage with community, play a role in society.
Yeah.
And that's quite exciting.
I think that also then speaks to the fact that there's clothing designers and fashion designers. There's two very different universes there, right? I mean, what is a fashion designer? What is a clothing designer? You know, a fashion designer creates a universe and it's got something to say about the world, society, politics, whatever. Whereas clothing designers design clothes to sell clothes for people to wear. There's a different conversation there.
Yeah, but then I think it's really about the traditional platform for fashion has almost run out of road and does not provide that space where these designers can actually flourish. And I think this is something where I would love to discuss about what is the cocoon, what is the space that we can create either within brands or within universities where actually creativity can benefit society. Because if you guys attended ComplexCon last week, it seems like the world can perfectly survive on hoodies, t-shirts for the next couple of 100 years. But at the same time, society needs designers, scientists, creatives to actually push the boundaries. So if we at the moment are not able to provide these designers or creatives with the space to flourish, I think us as a society don't benefit. So where do you see that creativity that comes out of schools like Parsons or FIT or so many others?
Yeah.
Where does that go?
Well, I think there's definitely a creative aspect to product development and advancing how we are creating the garment. And I think that designers that have come into an opportunity and have an open mind to how they can be part of the design process that might not necessarily be designing, like coming out of school and working maybe doing CADs and helping in the product development process. There is definitely a creative element that's also a very important part of the brand and the process. So being open-minded to those opportunities and kind of exploring more about the whole design process than necessarily an actual design.
And I can add to that as well. I think what we are doing is make sure that we are incorporating elements of art, design, culture, but also science, engineering into the way we engage, so that designers' roles are evolving. And at the same time, the large brands are aware of the challenges, hence they're creating a lot of new approaches within the organization. So one amazing trend that I have seen recently is quite a few brands are building their innovation labs, or creating places that's a collective space around really looking at new design opportunities. So it's bringing all of these creatives together to engage in different ways. And sometimes some of our graduates going into innovation labs are not actually designing any product. They're used within the organization to bring an innovative approach to the way every department thinks, not even just the design department. So we can see that the opportunity we created with opening the minds to say you're a critical thinker and you're a solution provider enables them to act more as an advisor within an organization rather than an intern who's really growing within.
Yeah, and they might end up finding that more rewarding than the traditional design process.
Yeah, and Kyle, you said you teach designers how to be themselves. Like, does that fit into this sort of concept?
I don't teach them how to be themselves necessarily. I give them space to be themselves and give them sort of the room to make mistakes, which is a very common conversation around education and design right now, is that, and just failing and learning from those failures, and you know, not being perfect and not being precise, and finding room within those failures to find the strengths and the best solutions. I think there's often you know, again, working in fashion design, designing clothes, you know, some of the conversations I had when I just left college was around how many buttons should be on a coat. And I couldn't survive that world. And for me, being in a school, which is now 15 years worth of education, I get to be 18 different people every day. And it's the most, you know, fulfilling thing in the world to help people find themselves and to see them go from, you know, they don't come into a graduate program as graduates, you know, they're there to learn and build and grow, and to see them evolve and make those mistakes and discover who they want to be from that. So it's not about teaching them to be themselves, it's about just giving them the authority to figure out who they are as designers, and in that going into industry, and rather than giving what they think industry is looking for, actually go and inform industry and educate industry, as opposed to giving industry what, you know, the industry standards, the myth of. I think, you know, students are actually probably more insightful to where it should be going than what we actually, as industry people, think it should be.
Yeah. You mentioned something really beautiful, which is the ability to make mistakes. That is one of the biggest feedback we receive from our community, that they find it hard to find environments where they're actually able to make mistakes. And again, coming back to society benefiting, we can only benefit from creatives if they are allowed to make mistakes. Now, the city of New York is not a city you can be making a lot of mistakes anymore, especially, you know, with two of the most renowned schools in the world. You cannot make many mistakes being in a school like that. Simon Coonan, back in the days, he wrote about we're losing all these sort of fashion freaks, the kids from the north of England. Where do they go and where do they fit in here? Putting the schools here on the spot.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the reality is we are opening that door to be more diverse. So we are not calling it a mistake, we are calling it experimentation and really more treating it as a lab. So every action that they take is leading to another solution. So when you frame it differently, there's no risk. The only challenge is when they're coming to the point of graduation, they want to figure out how they fit in. Yeah. So I think at the moment I'm trying to figure out how do we create kind of a soft landing, because we push them in a whole new direction that they are very different than what's out there. So we are trying to bridge that gap, that in the moment that they get out, maybe they need a year, 2 years, up to 3 years to figure out how to continue working on their initiatives that doesn't have a house in any brand in the world. But they're onto something very unique. So that's why we're engaging with a lot of incubators, investors, and spaces that can provide them access. So that we do everything that they have that freedom to continue experimenting.
Yeah. But where does a designer with, let's say, a non-traditional approach to actually applying for a job go? There's a lot of designers, especially in our platform, who tell us they've learned everything on YouTube. And you can obviously argue that they haven't had the experience that they had by coming to Parsons FIT, but they are equally brilliant. Some of the most famous designers in the world, they have not attended a fashion design school. Say they come to you and they want to apply for a job, what happens to them? Is the industry ready to bring talent like that in?
I think that having, again, that open mind to maybe take a position that's not necessarily working on the exact product that they want to work on, but seeing it as an opportunity to be exposed to all of the different elements of a fashion company and having that open mind, I think that that's just imperative. And then going out and having the internships, working on your own line at the same time, and maybe taking 2 to 3 week jobs, helping out in different areas.
Yeah.
I think something from my perspective in regards to students going out into the world, graduating, I think one thing that really needs to happen is the re-education of HR systems within larger companies, because there's still what a portfolio should look like. And that often doesn't get past the door if it's non-traditional portfolio. And you know, in this day and age, I mean, a portfolio is not a leather-bound book with sleeves, plastic sleeves with perfectly drawn croquis anymore. I mean, you know, there's multiple different ways in which designers design virtually. I mean, I've got students that are draping in virtual reality, and I know for a fact if they presented that to a typical HR, they would be like, what the hell is this? So I think there's a lots of education that has to come from schools to industry as to re-educate industry as to what a portfolio can and could be, instead of just doing what we already know it to look like. Because then it's that, you know, I was in Milan last January and was lucky enough to talk with the HR people from Prada, and they point blank said to me that they do not look at anybody's portfolio if they don't draw well. I mean, there's a million designers out there that cannot draw. I'm a drawer, but I advocate for those that can't. And you know, that's a problem. You know, there's some geniuses out there that are not getting into these companies because there's no room for them to get in because people don't understand their way of working.
But somebody self-taught is not looking for the same opportunities as somebody just graduating. There's no formula around what takes you to success. We just have to recognize that education gives access to opportunities, network, a space for you to go deeper into research, be part of a creative community. And if you're resilient enough, you can also do some of this from outside. But there's still a value in being part of that community because that really enables you to think differently about the future of design.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to map out what opportunities are out there for graduates at the moment, because we keep on talking about either you join Gap or any sort of luxury brand or you do it yourself, but we see there's so much more in between. There's such a big gray zone. In the end, designers are tastemakers, they are scientists, they are people who have something to say. Where do they fit into the industry? I mean, what opportunities are out there?
Well, sure, yeah. Again, I think there are, of course, entry-level design positions, but being open to the product development or CAD artist and, you know, just jumping in wherever you can or taking an internship at a brand you believe in, no matter what you're doing, you're being exposed on a daily basis to processes and people that you would never be exposed to otherwise. So just coming in with an open mind to do anything, especially with a brand you really believe in and want to get the door with.
Yeah, and the reality is they understand what does it mean to be a creative director in a nascent sense, because the way we evolved our curriculum is they're doing everything. So when they already graduate, they're doing videos and portfolios, and they have to be able to stand in front of an audience and talk about their ideas and image. So it takes into art direction and doing retail spaces to a lot of other untraditional areas, including people that are going into deep material research, or they're looking at, for example, recently we just had a few graduates hired by tech companies because they understand design process better than somebody in technology. And if there's an interest in working with, let's say, fashion brands for a technology company, they're recognizing that there's a value in working with somebody who graduated out of a fashion school. We're seeing other technology companies also, like IBM and others, looking at designers to come in and bring new ways of thinking. So I think it's our job to highlight that the approach we take to education is really this design process, which can be adapted to any industry in any different form and applied in non-traditional ways. It doesn't even have to come up with a finished product out of it. And I think slowly many companies are recognizing that value and that they can think out of the box and push the boundaries a little bit. And also we are seeing places like China where, you know, if you go to headquarters of Tencent, average age is 24. and that company is bigger than many companies we know. So there's a value in being young and using those ideas in a way that's disrupting the industry. And that can come from any angle. So we are trying to enable designers to be some of these solution providers for many of the industries. I don't know how you see it.
I mean, I think the ultimate thing, the ultimate luxury is time, right? I mean, as a student, you have the luxury of time to make these mistakes. But when you go and work for a company, you're up against the gun. You've got to get product out. You've got to be producing, and therefore that luxury of time is reduced to design the collections. So I think I think it's very difficult for people graduating to then suddenly be, we give them this room, and then suddenly they're working for someone, and it's a different language, it's a different world. So finding that bridge between the two is actually very, very difficult. And I think that there's an interesting space there to look at, actually, of we give them this creative freedom and allow them to be as dynamic and creative and make these mistakes, but when they go and work, they've got to deliver. And that's a very different conversation. So I think that's the tricky part.
So in a recent survey, every year we do a survey on not just the label now with about 35,000 designers, and we had a whole section about education, and 65% of them said, when I started my own brand, I didn't have the tools and the expertise to do so. And there were very specific areas where they felt like they didn't get what they wanted from university. Now, you could quote the late Louise Wilson, who says, we're an art school and we will always be an art school. And on the other side, I think you have a much more sort of open approach towards giving them the tools and the toolkit they need to actually run out and innovate the world.
And within that, how much place there is for just business knowledge versus expanding on what does creativity mean. So there's an element around being an art school and allowing that creativity to exist. And we don't want to lose that, but we want to even diversify it further so that they are doing creativity in many different areas.
But is it even possible to actually give them that toolkit? I did an MBA and I had no clue about what I was doing afterwards, so I think can you even provide that?
But that's what I was trying to get at. Within that toolkit, you're not necessarily going to teach them how to run a business because you don't know what kind of business they're going to end up in. And one thing we realized that we actually attempted to introduce hardcore business elements into our curriculum. Most of the time they don't want to take it at that time because they don't know where they're going to be. Their creative process is not complete. At the end of the 4th year, then they say, oh, I realized that I needed that, but it's too late now. And it's really hard to find that balance. I think we need to provide additional support once they are out of the system, and even through collaborations potentially with recruiters, brands, and many other organizations, because we shape their minds and we see where they fit. Can we use that as a way of giving them something that's deeper and then really providing the intensive knowledge they need to succeed?
I wrote the business courses into my program purely just for them to be able to have the conversations with the right people. I'm not a businessman. I can't even balance my own checkbook, right? So I can't expect them to be that either. They are creatives, and it is an art school. But I think the most important thing is to provide them with the tools and the knowledge to speak to the right people while they're in school, so that when they do leave, they can have the conversations with the kind of people that they need to. You can't expect them to be a photographer, an art director, a menswear designer, a women's wear designer, a business person. You can't expect them to be that. And I think just as long as you give them the toolbox, as you said, to be able to have conversations and understand them, I think that's the most important thing.
And because we are running out of time, I would like to ask all of you, personally, I think one of the biggest problems we have in fashion is complacency, and the fact that this oil tanker, we're not able to steer that around, and what we need is a U-turn. Considering you have massive influence on where the fashion goes, and if we create a new system, if there's sort of a plan B, what is your plan B? What can we work? What's sort of the ideal, and what is sort of the positive note that we can send out today?
I think in some ways we're trying to do that with the way we change and diversify our curriculum. We have every intention to have designers think about a new system and not just a product. The traditional way of educating them was around creating a garment or a collection that really looked good. So we're going much deeper into the meaning and its purpose, and how does it fit in society. So that is creating the diversity we need and opening the door for them to go and experiment what kind of new business ideas that they can generate to really challenge how the business is run today. And I'm very hopeful, but it's going to take a few years, of course, for it to be implemented. I can say that in the past couple of years, with the change in our curriculum, we've seen some incredible ideas come out for new opportunities that nobody ever tapped into, that I know there's going to be a lot more coming forward.
Yeah. Katie?
I'll leave it to the experts here, and we'll be happy to help once these students come out.
Kyle, over to you.
For me, I just get my students to think of themselves as future historians and to think of their work 100 years from now and just think about what their impact their work is having on society, on the world, and is it worth putting out there? If it's not, then don't do it.
Yeah.
It's that simple. We don't need more clothes.
That's great. Yeah. On that note, Katie, Burak, Kyle, thanks so much for joining me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you,
yeah.